The ideal city, Plato envisioned, was not built on the shifting sands of momentary opinion. It was a monument to rational order, a perfect reflection of truth itself. But look closely at the gleaming marble facades and listen past the celebratory shouts of your era's democracy. Beneath this veneer of freedom, there stirred a profound discomfort, a deep question that troubled the young mind of Plato. He looked upon Athenian life, a society celebrating its own liberty, and saw not pure excellence, but potential chaos wearing a festive mask. He wondered, how can a whole community thrive when the governance itself is rooted in sheer whim? Is it enough simply to vote, simply to speak loudly, and thus assume wisdom? The very air of Athens seemed thick with the smoke of rhetoric, promising every man a voice while giving no guidance on how to properly listen. This was the beginning of his doubt. Plato sensed that freedom, untempered by discipline and guided by rigorous thought, could become merely license, a wild indulgence. He observed men arguing in the marketplace, passion fueling their words, logic struggling to keep pace with emotion. These arguments were often magnificent performances, the eloquent speeches of brilliant orators who specialized not in finding truth, but in persuading an audience that they were right. They understood the mechanics of consensus more deeply than they understood reality itself. The city, for Plato, was like a living organism. Every part must perform its function with dedicated excellence. If the hands try to govern based on emotion, or if the mouths speak only because passion demands it, then the entire body suffers an imbalance. True stability does not come from an equal sharing of power. It comes from understanding where each component excels and trusting that expertise. His introspection led him down a troubling path, the realization that popular opinion is often nothing more than collective yearning. It is ephemeral. It rises with the emotional tides, fear, momentary outrage, bursts of unjustified pride, and falls just as quickly. The soul of the state became thus subject to the deepest instabilities of human mood. To govern by consensus in this manner meant adopting a rudder that was constantly pulled in 1,000 contradictory directions. No clear course could ever be maintained. This suspicion grew into a comprehensive philosophical challenge against the prevailing political spirit. He felt that Athenian democracy, for all its noble aspirations toward man's freedom, risked devolving into something far less disciplined, a sprawling feast where too many hands reach for too many courses. The result is not nourishment, it is indigestion. It leads to an inability to discern what is genuinely needed from what is merely desired. And the greatest danger inherent in that boundless will was forgetting that the highest good requires the most disciplined understanding. He began to search, not for a more popular system of rule, but for an architecture of justice, a blueprint so rational and structurally sound that human passion could only admire it from afar. He needed a model where the wisest voices held the greatest weight, not because they demanded it, but because their perspective was inherently superior. This doubt became his life's great project, to prove that true political stability required more than just the collective will. It required illuminated, expert wisdom acting as its steady core. The murmuring satisfaction of the crowd could not sustain civilization forever. It needed structure, deep knowledge, and a permanent guardianship informed by the perfect forms. Observe the marketplace. It is a vibrant place of humanity, filled with the clamor of commerce and the louder clatter of debate. This agora is intended to be the heart of city life, the engine of exchange, but often it becomes something far less useful, a theater for loud, unexamined opinion. Look closely at the faces here. They are expressive, animated by immediate concerns, the price of grain, the fairness of a tax, the merits of a recent passing law. But pay heed not just to what is being said, but how it is being said. The noise itself becomes a kind of authority. This collective volume mistakes mere clamor for true wisdom. For Plato, this scene reveals a profound and dangerous misunderstanding of human intelligence. He observed that much of the political life was driven by rhetoric, the art of speaking persuasively, rather than by the arduous process of knowledge itself. Rhetoric is appealing. It seeks to make us feel good about our convictions, to connect emotionally with our deepest desires. It rewards passion and enthusiasm. True knowledge, however, is often quiet, demanding deep thought, contradiction, and sometimes uncomfortable self-correction. Such pursuits are not conducive to the lively, profitable noise of the crowd. The democratic ideal, as many believed, was rooted in the simple premise of equality, that every citizen deserved an equal voice, and thus, their collective votes represented perfect wisdom. Yet, what Plato saw was a populace mistaking the sheer weight of opinion for actual insight. To vote is easy. It requires little more than participation. But to govern, truly and justly, demands a kind of specialized, almost painful form of expertise. It demands understanding complex systems, the natural laws governing justice, or the physics of an ideal city structure. This does not come from a simple poll of votes. The allure of the crowd is intoxicating precisely because it speaks directly to our emotional needs. The crowd allows us temporary freedom from critical thought. Here, we do not need to read difficult texts or wrestle with moral paradoxes. We simply feel. We agree with what is shouted loudest and most enthusiastically. This feeling masquerades as certainty. It gives the illusion that if enough people feel something strongly enough, then that thing must be true, that policy must succeed, and that governance will be just. The collective emotional whim, therefore, holds greater weight than measured reason. Consider the structure of a healthy soul, mirroring the ideal state. We know that our appetites, our desires for pleasure, for wealth, for immediate gratification, are often loud and demanding. Our spirit is fiery, prone to honor and righteous indignation. And finally, we have our reason, the quietest part, which seeks truth above comfort or popularity. In a functioning democracy driven by raw opinion, what thrives are the appetites and the volatile spirit. Reason, which requires self-discipline and detachment from popular sentiment, is marginalized. It becomes the quiet voice that nobody listens to until the moment the whole structure begins to wobble. The dangers become apparent when political decisions are made not for the sake of the polis, the common good, but for the emotional satisfaction of the majority. The citizens vote against what they know to be wise, simply because it is unpopular, or they choose policies that only promise immediate relief without addressing the underlying structural flaws. This leads to instability. Society becomes a perpetual reaction, always rushing toward the next temporary fix, suggested by the loudest voice in the agora. Plato's challenge here was revolutionary. He argued that merely being free enough to vote does not equate to being wise enough to govern. Genuine liberty requires more than just the absence of chains. It demands education, a disciplined intellect, and the ability to distinguish between what is pleasurable and what is truly good for the soul or the state. The democracy swayed by mere opinion risks collapsing into a tyranny, not necessarily by one powerful despot, but by a committee of misguided passions. It is ruled by majority emotion, a system structurally incapable of sustained excellence. We must learn to differentiate between pleasing noise and profound truth. Noise generates consensus quickly. Truth demands solitary contemplation, rigorous questioning, and the difficult acceptance that sometimes what is most beneficial for us, or for our city, is exactly what we desire least. The pursuit of knowledge, therefore, becomes not merely an academic exercise, but a vital act of political survival. If the citizens abandon the demanding quiet of philosophical inquiry for the easy enthusiasm of public display, then the state itself will inevitably suffer. This is the fundamental tragedy that Plato observed. Humanity often chooses the comfort of the known illusion over the rigor of difficult truth. We have spent much time looking outward, at the chaos of the marketplace, the loud clamor of unexamined opinion. But to truly understand why the democracy Plato critiqued was so doomed, we must first turn inward. We must look not at the votes cast in public squares, but at the fundamental nature of humanity itself. The greatest error of democratic thinking is a dangerous assumption, the assumption that all people begin with equal potential for governance. It suggests that since every citizen has the same voice and the right to participate equally, they must therefore possess an equivalent capacity for reason or virtue when making decisions that affect the whole community. This belief, however comforting, blinds us to the truth of human disparity. Equality, in the eyes of Plato, was becoming a dangerous euphemism. It was used to mean merely equal rights to speak, but this quickly morphed into equal capacity to rule. And here lies the fundamental instability that would undermine any system built upon such an illusion. The reality is far more nuanced. Just as we know that a master carpenter and a novice builder, though both skilled workers, possess vastly different levels of trained skill, so too do human souls. Some are naturally inclined toward caution and disciplined thought. Others are swept away by the immediate warmth of emotion or consumed by the frantic rush of impulse. The democratic ideal attempts to smooth out these natural contours. It suggests that if we treat all citizens as fundamentally equal in capability, equal in restraint, then governance becomes a simple exercise in majority whim. But Plato argues that when you ask a populace with diverse natures to apply a single standard of judgment, the result is not harmony. It is inevitable systemic failure. Consider the nature of ability itself. Some people are gifted with rational contemplation, capable of seeing the underlying structure, the perfect blueprint for justice. Others possess immense physical energy and immediate passion, which makes them excellent at conflict but poor at deliberation. And yet, democratic structures reward the loudest voice, the most passionate appeal, treating these varied temperaments as if they were interchangeable tools in a single toolbox. The attempt to force specialized, unique abilities into one uniform governance model is inherently unstable. It requires those who are meant to be careful thinkers to operate under the same authority and equal weight as those governed by immediate feeling. This mismatch creates constant internal friction. Imagine trying to construct a magnificent temple using only pieces of wood that were equally priced for sale, regardless of whether they were sturdy oak, brittle pine, or soft sapling. The structure will always wobble. It lacks the necessary specialized material at the critical points. This is not merely an argument about differing talents. It touches on what Plato called the hierarchy of the soul itself. He observed that human beings possess distinct parts: the rational part, which seeks knowledge and truth; the spirited part, which represents honor, anger, and emotional drive; and the appetitive part, which governs basic needs and desires. A perfectly stable society, to Plato's mind, must not simply treat all three elements equally. Instead, it requires a natural order where one element, reason, is allowed to guide and restrain the other two. The spirited urges need channeling through wisdom. The raw appetites need discipline guided by pure reason. The democratic system, in its purest form of popular rule, has no mechanism for this vital ordering. It flattens the spectrum of human experience into a single level of voting participation. When every desire is given equal political weight, the urge to feast, the rush of anger, and the slow contemplation of truth, they cancel each other out. The result is not a balanced compromise, it is intellectual paralysis. The illusion, therefore, was the belief that mere democratic will could achieve what requires specialized wisdom. To grant equal voice did not grant equal virtue. It merely magnified the noise generated by conflicting natural impulses. And where there is constant, unmediated conflict among nature's diverse elements, stability cannot hold long. The system exhausts itself striving to please every equally weighted, yet fundamentally contradictory, desire. We have seen the pull of the crowd, the dangerous allure of mere opinion. We learned that democracy risks valuing loud clamor over quiet truth. But to understand why this path is so fraught with peril, we must examine the very heart of man, the temperament by which he thinks, desires, and acts. Plato believed the soul was not a singular, simple thing. It was a battlefield, a council of competing forces that were constantly at war. Imagine the human psyche as an instrument composed of differing parts. There is reason, the charioteer who seeks balance and truth. There is spirit or passion, the noble fire that fuels courage and righteous indignation. And then there are the appetites, the base desires for comfort, food, wealth, and immediate pleasure. These three elements represent the fundamental structure of human temperament. The perfect state, Plato argued, was merely a mirror image of the perfectly ordered soul. If the individual could keep these parts in harmony, if reason reigned supreme over passion and appetite, then that person would be wise, capable, and contributing to the good life. But if any single part gained unchecked dominance, the entire self, and by extension the state built by many such selves, risked collapse. The danger began when the appetites were given political voice equal to reason, when a society prioritized immediate gratification, the constant seeking of pleasure or wealth, over disciplined thought. It was simply giving license to its lowest impulses. The ruling appetite, Plato warned, is not merely an internal flaw. It becomes the dominant force in the city-state itself. The spirit, while vital for courage and defense, could also become inflamed into unchecked rage or paranoia. When the emotional fire of the spirit burns too hot, without the cooling guidance of reason, it leads to revolution, bloodlust, and cycles of instability. The citizen acts not based on justice or deliberation, but on feeling, on being provoked or outraged. The sheer difficulty of this self-governance became the fundamental flaw in democratic idealism. Democracy inherently assumes that all temperaments are balanced enough to participate equally in decision-making. Yet Plato observed that men are fundamentally asymmetrical in their inner lives. Some souls naturally favor reason, others tilt dangerously toward passion or desire. To assume equality among these deep, natural differences is intellectual hubris, a dangerous faith misplaced on the volatile nature of man. Consider the sculptor who works with raw clay. The potential for beauty exists within the lump of earth, but without disciplined knowledge and skilled hands, it remains merely chaotic mud. Similarly, humanity contains the capacity for high civilization, for profound reason, but this capacity must be guided and shaped by expertise that transcends mere majority vote. If we leave the sculpting to everyone, to every passing whim or momentary rage. The result is not a masterpiece, but a pile of indistinguishable scraps. The true tragedy of democratic excess was its inability to differentiate between controlled passion and rampant impulse. It celebrated loud declaration while ignoring disciplined contemplation. It confused freedom from restraint with authentic self-mastery. Freedom, for Plato, meant liberation through discipline, not the absence of structure. To be truly free was to rule oneself effectively. The state, therefore, needed a hierarchy that reflected this internal order. Reason must preside over spirit, and both must control appetite. This is not merely an elegant philosophy. It is a practical necessity for survival. A society where the common man's most immediate desires dictate law inevitably descends into a struggle of wills, losing sight of what is truly good or just for the collective whole. The consequences were profound. Unchecked desire leads to greed and corruption. Unguided passion fuels conflict and betrayal, and the lack of rational coordination leaves the state adrift, incapable of defining its true purpose beyond the next moment's pleasure. It became a perpetual, exhausting compromise where nothing was achieved with clarity or permanence. The echoes of Temperament warned us that a society cannot function by mere consensus if the underlying emotional currents are erratic and poorly managed. Only when guided by tested, rigorous reason can civilization truly achieve stability. The weight of knowledge is a burden few are prepared to bear. It demands a profound withdrawal from the immediate clamor and pleasures that define much human existence. To truly see the flaw in the democratic structure, one must first achieve a mastery over oneself, a discipline far harder than governing a city. Plato understood that the greatest battlefield was not on the physical plains of Athens, but within the soul itself. The citizen who cannot govern his own appetites will certainly fail to govern a state. This self-mastery is the essential precursor to wisdom, and it forms the bedrock upon which any just society must be built. Consider the individual mind in isolation. It is not a unified entity. Rather, it is a complex landscape of competing forces. We have the rational part, the thoughtful core that seeks truth. Then we have the spirited element, the passion and indignation that drives us to defend our values and ideals. Finally, there are the appetites, the raw desires for comfort, food, wealth, and immediate gratification. These three parts interact constantly, often violently, in a state of internal civil war. In a healthy life, reason must assume its rightful place as the charioteer, guiding the spirited horse and restraining the unruly one. It does not mean that reason eliminates passion or desire. Rather, it means reason disciplines them, directing their powerful energies toward noble ends. This necessary hierarchy, where intellect controls impulse, is the foundational requirement for a stable individual, and thus for a stable polis. But democracy fails because it fundamentally misunderstands this inner order. It treats the roar of the lowest appetites, the immediate whim or fleeting popular desire, as if they were guided by reason. The marketplace becomes not a forum for debate, but a cacophony where the loudest voices win, regardless of their depth of insight or moral wisdom. Plato saw democracy mistaking unreasoned enthusiasm for genuine political will. The pursuit of self-rule thus forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. True liberty is not merely the freedom to do whatever one desires, but the disciplined ability to choose the good, even when it is difficult and unpopular. This shift in definition changes everything. Freedom must be defined by virtue and knowledge, not simply by absence of restraint. This internal struggle mirrors the state's struggle. If the individual cannot maintain a rational balance between desire and duty, how can they contribute to the collective good? An unexamined life is not merely unprofitable, it is politically dangerous. When people neglect introspection, when they refuse the quiet labor of questioning their own biases and impulses, they become susceptible to demagogues who promise simple answers to complex problems. These leaders do not appeal to virtue. They appeal directly to fear, anger, and desire. The philosopher-king concept was thus not merely a political proposal, but a deep psychological diagnosis of the human condition. It was an acknowledgement that governance requires a specific, highly cultivated form of intellectual detachment, the ability to view social dynamics from a distance, unswayed by personal ambition or momentary public approval. This withdrawal is necessary precisely because the emotional investment required for pure participation in a democracy would corrupt the judgment. The expert must remain objective, seeing the true form of justice over the messy, mutable opinions of the crowd. Such governance demands lifelong education, not just in rhetoric or law, but in philosophy itself, the training of the mind to discern reality from illusion. It requires cultivating a disciplined rejection of superficial metrics of value. To govern wisely is first and foremost to know what is truly valuable, not popular applause, not wealth accumulation, but intellectual integrity and adherence to reasoned principle. This process is excruciatingly difficult, demanding that those who lead sacrifice personal power and glory for the sake of universal truth. The burden is immense. The philosopher must possess absolute self-mastery, because their judgment will determine the direction of thousands of lives. They are tasked with steering the grand ship of civilization away from the shoals of passion and toward the deep, stable channels of enduring reason. This guardianship requires more than mere intelligence. It demands a profound commitment to the collective good that supersedes private interest. It is a constant act of self-denial for the sake of wisdom. We have explored the whispers of discontent that first troubled Plato's mind. We saw how Athenian life, in its fervent passion and its ceaseless clamor, seemed to pull at the threads of rational order. But our journey takes us inward now, past the noise of the marketplace and away from the pronouncements of the crowd. The greatest crisis is not external. It resides deep within the self. For Plato understood that a society is merely a reflection of its individual souls. If we fail to cultivate internal balance, how can we possibly govern an outer world? To rule wisely, one must first be ruled by reason at home. This brings us to the essential tragedy, the sorrowful truth of human existence itself, living without conscious examination. The comfortable routine of life, the predictable rhythms of duty, habit, and expectation can become a silken cage. We wake up, we perform our allotted roles, we speak what is expected, and by nightfall, we fall asleep, unaware that the most vital part of ourselves has been neglected. This failure to question one's own assumptions is perhaps the deepest flaw in human governance. We build systems based on accepted truths, but these accepted truths are often nothing more than crystallized ignorance. Consider the life lived simply for comfort or for adherence to tradition. Such lives do not require deep thinking, they merely require compliance. Compliance is easy, and society rewards ease. But true knowledge demands a relentless effort, a continuous turning inward that feels unnervingly lonely at first. It requires confronting the parts of ourselves that we find distasteful, our biases, our inherent fears, our casual prejudices about others. This self-scrutiny is taxing. It feels like stripping away layers of comforting illusion. When Plato spoke of the unexamined life, he did not merely suggest intellectual curiosity. He pointed to a fundamental structural failure in human existence, a negligence of the soul itself. To live without examining one's own motivations means that every decision we make, whether political or personal, is driven by impulse or inherited habit rather than reasoned understanding. We mistake sheer momentum for destiny and fleeting agreement for genuine consensus. We believe that because millions of people hold an opinion in the public square, that opinion must possess some deep, underlying truth. Yet, this popular affirmation of untested ideas only serves to reinforce collective delusion. It is a dangerous alchemy where noise is mistaken for profound insight. This inability to pause, to reflect on the why behind our deeply held beliefs, creates political structures inherently unstable. Such societies are forever cycling between bouts of ecstatic passion and deep, paralyzing fear. The passions dictate policy, the appetites determine law. Reason, in this model of daily distraction, is always relegated to a quiet corner, politely ignored until it starves away. We build systems that maximize immediate gratification and minimize intellectual discomfort. This systemic preference for ease makes governance impossible. A government cannot function when its most essential citizens, the people who form the bedrock of its stability, are unaware they are drifting through life on currents of unexamined habit. They are, in essence, ruling themselves poorly, and by extension, their state fails to properly govern itself. To overcome this tragedy, we must first confront a terrifying personal question. Do you truly know yourself? Not the version of yourself that performs for society, but the core self that stands exposed when all societal expectations are stripped away. This process of self-knowledge is painful and disruptive. It forces one to acknowledge contradictions. The times we preach freedom while demanding strict order. The moments we claim wisdom yet fear deep questioning. A society composed of individuals who have not mastered this inner dialogue will inevitably falter, no matter how strong its armies or how magnificent its architecture. The structure built upon unexamined lives is destined for erosion. A grand edifice that cannot withstand the weight of genuine philosophical inquiry. We must treat self-mastery as the first and most critical act of citizenship. It is the initial guardrail before any state can claim true order. If we fail here, all subsequent attempts at political justice are merely elaborate stagecraft to distract us from the profound work of the mind. Having traced the inherent fallibility of mere opinion in the crowded marketplace, we now arrive at the most dangerous temptation of all, the democracy itself. Democracy, at its heart, is often presented as the ultimate expression of human freedom, the joyful embrace of self-rule. It suggests that every voice matters equally, and that true citizenship lies simply in participation. But look closer at this siren song of liberty. What we see gleaming before us is not pure self-determination. It is a seductive intoxication. Democracy promises a vast, boundless feast where everyone has the right to choose everything, yet this very abundance becomes its poison. We have learned that true governance requires an understanding of specialized knowledge, the rigorous pursuit of truth by those few who dedicate their lives to wisdom. Yet, democracy operates on the fundamentally flawed premise that such knowledge is unnecessary. Instead, it equates choice with virtue, and opinion with expertise. The sheer volume of voices becomes mistaken for profound insight. The democratic ideal loves freedom above all else. It champions the liberty to express every feeling, to follow every whim, and to vote on every conceivable issue, no matter how ill-considered or divisive. This passionate love for autonomy blinds the citizen to structural reality. The people mistake their right to speak loudly for the capacity to rule wisely. They cherish the moment of making a choice, even if that choice is motivated by fleeting emotion or temporary satisfaction. The result is a state perpetually swinging between extremes, because there is no necessary bridle, no expert restraining passion and appetite. The governing body becomes susceptible to sudden mood swings. Yesterday's accepted norm can be tossed aside today simply because the majority feels otherwise. The focus shifts entirely from enduring truth toward immediate sentiment. Consider the nature of a truly free being. They are capable of restraint, capable of deferring gratification, and capable of adhering to principles even when it is unpopular. This capacity for disciplined choice is what separates true governance from mere chaos. Democracy rewards passion. It does not discipline it. It allows every emotional current to pull equally, creating not harmony, but a frantic, exhausting tug-of-war. We see the seductive power of the many hands pulling in different directions. Each person approaches decision-making as if their immediate desire were the single most important truth in existence. One corner demands radical novelty, another insists on dogmatic tradition. The conflict is constant, draining the collective will until no major decision can be finalized, only endless debate and procedural exhaustion. It becomes a spectacle of indecision. Because every opinion has equal weight, the heartfelt cry of the laborer holds the same vote as the meticulously reasoned treatise of the scholar. The state loses its anchor. The most rational path is drowned out by the loudest chorus. This is not governance, it is collective whim. The great tragedy of democracy, therefore, is that it mistakes superficial participation for deep wisdom. It confuses the right to speak with the ability to judge. When structure and guiding principle are discarded in favor of pure, unrestrained will, the state does not become freer. It becomes profoundly more vulnerable to dissolution. The citizen, enchanted by the myth of unlimited freedom, willingly gives up the stability that only order can provide. They would rather live in a vibrant storm of constant choice than accept the quiet discipline necessary for true excellence and justice. It is this yearning for infinite license, this emotional satiation, that Plato saw leading inexorably toward instability, a glorious but ultimately unsustainable fever dream of self-rule. To be truly free means knowing when to resist one's impulses, and democracy seems to celebrate the very impulse itself, no matter how destructive it might prove. In the wake of our deep examination of political thought, we arrive at a profound and subtle diagnosis. We have seen how mere opinion, unchecked by wisdom, tears down what it cannot construct. Yet, democracy often presents itself not as a violent upheaval, but as something far more insidious, weak hands at work. Imagine decision-making not as the thunderous declaration of a single speaker, but as a committee meeting where every voice insists on being equally loud and equally important. This is not unity, it is cacophony. It is the intellectual equivalent of a poorly choreographed dance where everyone pushes against an unseen force in different directions. The intention might be freedom, the purest expression of collective will, but the result is nothing but exhausting indecision. Everyone has something to say, and every saying carries the weight of undeniable truth within that specific moment. No single voice is allowed to rise above the noise of others, so all voices become merely loud. This process reflects a profound failure of human judgment. It confuses the sheer act of participation with genuine effective action. The greatest danger here is not malice or tyranny by force, but paralysis born of endless deliberation and conflicting mandates. To be endlessly free to speak one's mind means being perpetually unable to commit to a necessary course of action. Such governance suffers from an inability to distinguish between the urgent and the truly vital. It becomes obsessed with resolving every minor dispute, spending its finite energy on trifles that should never have been debated in the first place. Resources, intellectual, material, even spiritual, are continually drained by the need to satisfy every passing whim. Where true strength lies in disciplined commitment to a highest good, democratic governance seems content with merely accommodating the loudest or most persistent complaint of the moment. It prioritizes immediate emotional release over long-term structural integrity. The state becomes soft, yielding, unable to define its own core purpose, because it is constantly bending to accommodate shifting currents of popular dissatisfaction. Consider the deep intellectual exhaustion inherent in this model. When everyone must vote on everything, they become experts in indecision. They develop an aversion not merely to wrong choices, but to any choice that requires sacrifice or singular dedication. The path of least resistance becomes the political dogma. It is easier, indeed safer, for a system defined by endless compromise and diffused authority to simply do nothing at all. This tyranny by committee is therefore not a rule imposed from above. It is 1,000 small hands pulling in different directions until the structure itself collapses under its own internal tension. It wears the mask of participatory fairness, yet its true outcome is systematic failure and institutional exhaustion. The collective inability to say no, or even to declare this is beyond repair, becomes a form of subtle but absolute enslavement. The consequence for humanity is profound. If all action requires consensus among equally weighted opinions, then nothing truly monumental can ever be achieved. Great art, great philosophy, and grand civic structures all require the single vision, the uncompromising dedication, and the focused discipline that this committee model inherently lacks. It leaves society perpetually in a state of soft decay, not the dramatic collapse modeled by open warfare, but the slow erosion caused by cumulative weakness. Every decision is watered down until it loses its necessary sharpness, its moral clarity, or its functional power. The will becomes weak, and the purpose dissolves into a murky agreement that pleases no one completely while satisfying none entirely. This inability to draw necessary lines, the boundaries between what is desired and what is good, between immediate comfort and lasting virtue, is perhaps the most dangerous flaw of democracy. It fails to acknowledge that true liberty is not simply the freedom to choose everything, but the disciplined capacity to correctly recognize the single, right course of action, and the will to follow it, even when unpopular. To govern through a committee of weak hands means perpetually operating at half strength. The state becomes brittle, not from external attack, but from internal overnegotiation. It is forever poised on the brink of incoherence, unable to find a solid foundation, because every group insisted its individual patch of ground was the only stable one. This systemic hesitation, this refusal to bear the necessary burden of clear vision, guarantees instability and ultimately a decline into impotence, leaving the soul of the city malnourished by endless debate. The journey through the heart of law and governance has brought us to a critical intellectual impasse. We have seen how democracy, in its purest embrace of equal voices and boundless choice, can become both intoxicatingly appealing and ultimately destructive. It whispers promises of total freedom, yet often delivers only fragmentation. The previous chapters have dismantled the ideal of pure popular will. We learned that mere consensus is a fragile thing, easily derailed by emotion or swayed by charismatic rhetoric. The state cannot be run merely by wishful thinking. It requires deep structure, specialization, and a profound understanding of what justice truly means, a concept far more intricate than a simple majority vote. And now we must confront the radical nature of speech itself. We examine the limits of freedom when that speech becomes pure force, a destructive wave lacking any guiding principle or constructive aim. This is the cynic's corner, a test case for unchecked expression. Should every thought, however raw, undisciplined, or venomous, be given equal weight in the civic square? Plato forces us to ask a challenging question regarding free speech. Is freedom beneficial if its primary function is merely tearing down structures, rather than helping build them up? Consider the Cynics, those early philosophers who took critique to an extreme. They practiced radical dissent. Their philosophy suggested that true virtue lay in rejecting all conventional societal norms, discarding not just wealth or status, but even language itself, treating civilization as a necessary and often corrupting layer over natural man. The impact of such absolute freedom of speech can be jarring. When critique is its own end, when the sole purpose of speaking is to provoke shock or laughter at the expense of established order, it loses its intellectual merit. It becomes noise. And nothing inherent in democracy seems equipped to distinguish between genuine, insightful critique and mere destructive clamor. We must pause here, recognizing that a state built solely on unchecked expression risks collapse not from an enemy army, but from within its own mouth. A society where every idea, every passing peak, is given the full liberty of utterance can quickly devolve into intellectual anarchy. The marketplace of ideas, when left unregulated by reason and principle, becomes nothing more than a riotous shouting match. This leads us to an unsettling paradox. If we demand perfect freedom, do we sacrifice the very possibility of effective governance? Is total latitude in speech always synonymous with enlightenment? History suggests that unrestricted expression can be corrosive. The truth, after all, does not scream loudest. It whispers from those who have spent lifetimes cultivating genuine understanding. This radical free speech forces us to look closer at the mechanics of opinion versus knowledge one final time. Opinion is instantaneous, emotional, and often tribal in nature. Knowledge requires discipline, painful contemplation, and the rigorous separation of fact from feeling. When a democracy equates the passionate outcry of an uninformed mob with the carefully considered analysis of an expert, it has fundamentally misunderstood its own operational requirements. The Cynic's model offers us a vital warning. Unchecked freedom without internalized restraint is simply license. License is the permission to act rashly. Discipline is the guiding force that ensures those actions align with enduring principles of justice and order. To mistake these two is to doom the polis to cycles of self-sabotage. Furthermore, this examination leads us inevitably to the internal landscape. The failure of the state is always a reflection of the failure of the individual soul. If we cannot control the impulses that drive our own speech, the need to lash out in indignation, the rush to confirm tribal biases, the compulsion to be heard regardless of truth, how can we possibly build a just political system? The external chaos mirrors an internal mess. The ultimate conclusion, emerging from this corner of radical dissent, is not a blanket condemnation of freedom. Rather, It is a profound recognition that true intellectual liberty is not found in the right to speak whatever one wants, but in the cultivation of the virtue required to know when and how one ought to speak, when truth demands silence, and when reason commands articulation. This sets the stage for our final philosophical inquiries. We must turn inward. The external political chaos we have so meticulously mapped out is merely a projection of an internal human mess. Therefore, any pursuit of justice in the city must begin with a ruthless accounting of oneself. True governance must start from the mastery of the self. It requires confronting not only the limitations of law and rhetoric, but the deepest biases harbored within our own reasoning capacity. We must first become masters of our appetites, then of our passions, before we ever hope to guide the collective human spirit toward lasting, reasoned order. We have examined the laws of the city, the external struggles of human society. We have seen how popular opinion can drown out reason in the grand marketplace. But the true failing of any republic does not begin on the streets or in the halls of government. It begins within the single soul, in the quiet chambers of our own minds. Plato compels us to turn inward. He suggests that a stable state cannot be built upon an unstable foundation. The unexamined individual. The chaotic politics we have described are merely reflections of internal disorder. If the citizens do not possess order within themselves, how can they ever hope to create one without? True governance is thus revealed to be less a matter of constitutional law and more a profound psychological discipline. Consider the state first as a microcosm of the individual life. The soul itself is tripartite, much like the city we have discussed: reason, spirit, and desire. These three components constantly wrestle for dominance. Sometimes the appetite, our raw desires, our immediate pleasures, scream loudest, demanding satisfaction without thought of consequence. Other times, the spirited element, the emotions, our pride, our passion for honor or vengeance, rises up, fueling conflict based on perceived slights. And yet, reason, that steady, cool light, must remain supreme. It is not enough simply to possess these parts. They must be disciplined and placed in a proper hierarchy where reason guides the passions and moderates the raw desires. This internal strife mirrors every political failure we have observed. When a state succumbs to mere clamor or uncontrolled appetite, it is because its people have failed this fundamental psychological test. They allow their loudest whim, their most urgent desire, to dictate law, ignoring the quiet counsel of disciplined thought. To build a just society, therefore, one must first cultivate a just soul. This realization shifts our focus from blaming external political forces to undertaking an intensely personal revolution. We are called not merely to observe faulty governments, but to become philosophers ourselves, to masters of self. The burden is profound because it demands that we govern the self before attempting to govern others. Self-knowledge, therefore, becomes the ultimate civic virtue. It requires us to look beyond the comfortable routines and habitual assumptions with which we live. We must ask the difficult questions. Why do I believe this? Where did this impulse come from? Am I acting out of genuine reasoned choice, or merely because it is expected of me? The answer to these questions often exposes layers of bias, comfort, and intellectual laziness that underpin our decisions. An unexamined life is not just unproductive. In the context of Plato's thought, it is fundamentally unjust, a failure both personal and political. Only by grappling with our biases, confronting our inherent limitations, and subjecting our deepest motivations to rigorous questioning, can we begin to lay any claim to true stability or lasting justice for ourselves. and consequently, for the whole community. The individual who achieves internal mastery becomes the necessary pillar for a just society. They are those capable of intellectual detachment, the ability to view their own impulses and societal expectations from an objective distance. This is the first step toward becoming truly free. It is recognizing that genuine freedom does not come from license, but from self-mastery. If we cannot rule ourselves, any attempt to impose order on a state will merely be an act of projection. We simply repeat our internal chaos outward onto others. The philosopher, then, must become the ultimate custodian of this internal discipline. They do not seek power for personal glory or luxury. They accept it as a solemn burden because their highest obligation is to truth itself. This objective viewpoint allows them to see past the glittering distractions of popular opinion and grasp the unchanging forms, the perfect blueprints of justice, beauty, and truth that govern existence. The philosopher king's role, in this context, is nothing less than that of a master artisan. He must diagnose the deepest faults not just in the Constitution, but in the collective human spirit. He must guide society away from the siren song of immediate gratification and back toward the rigorous path of sustained contemplation. This disciplined life of the philosopher serves as the essential antidote to the seductive nature of democracy. Where democratic chaos rewards quick emotion, the discipline of philosophy demands patience, deep thought, and humility. It is a radical call for restraint over desire, restraint over passion, and most importantly, restraint over unthinking opinion. The true battleground for civilization is always within the human mind. By achieving self-mastery, we fulfill our deepest civic duty, to become architects of reason in both ourselves and in our community. This disciplined approach ensures that any resulting structure, political or personal, will be built on rock, not on shifting sand. Our struggle today, therefore, is not merely about choosing a system. It is about disciplining the self, a lifelong journey toward reasoned excellence. This process of introspection paves the way for the ultimate ideal, a society guided not by the fickle majority, but by enduring, objective wisdom. We have traversed the chaotic marketplaces of opinion and examined the deep divisions within the self. We learned that true stability does not spring from simple shared will, nor can it be founded merely on popular vote. If the soul is composed of competing desires, reason seeking order, passion striving for immediate satisfaction, and appetite demanding comfort, then a state governed solely by these conflicting impulses is destined to drift in endless indecision. The previous path of inquiry led us inward, requiring the philosopher to tame their own inner turmoil before they could hope to guide a polis. But understanding oneself only prepares the ground. It does not reveal the destination. For true governance cannot be based simply on internal order or virtuous self-mastery alone. We must ask, what is the ultimate standard against which we measure justice? What principle, transcendent and eternal, guides us toward the good life? This brings us to an ascent, a journey away from the messy, mutable world of human law, custom, and shifting political opinion. Plato directs our gaze beyond the tangible chaos of Athens towards a realm of pure thought, the world of forms. The physical city we inhabit is constantly changing. Laws are revised, customs fade, opinions rise and fall with the tide of rhetoric. If justice in this earthly sense merely reflects whatever the loudest faction demands today, then it cannot be truly stable, for human passion knows no stability. Likewise, beauty and truth here are relative, dependent on our flawed perception. Plato suggests that these concepts, justice, beauty, goodness, equality, do not exist here. They only appear as poor imitations or shadows of perfect originals elsewhere. These perfect blueprints, the forms, are eternal, unchanging, and absolute. They are the true essence of what things ought to be. To understand justice in Athens is merely to grasp a mere copy. To truly understand justice itself requires philosophical contemplation, a disciplined ascent of the mind that lifts us above the superficial arguments of the crowd. It is like searching for the original mathematical perfect circle, rather than simply observing imperfect drawings on a blackboard. The form of justice, then, is not simply rule by law or majority rule. It is an objective ideal, a singular blueprint representing right ordering in its purest state. This ultimate standard must guide every political decision, purifying it from the stain of temporary desire and momentary whim. If we fail to grasp this transcendent form, if our rulers remain focused only on appeasing immediate popular emotion or maximizing temporary comfort, then all their actions will inevitably be misdirected, leading to injustice in every corner of life. They attempt to build a complex ethical structure using materials that are themselves flimsy and contradictory. The foundation gives way. This pursuit is terrifying because it requires profound intellectual discipline. Most people, accustomed to the sensory feast and the immediate reward of opinion, resist this difficult ascent into pure reason. To contemplate the forms means accepting that much of what they consider life or governance is merely noise, a dazzling but ultimately meaningless reflection. The philosopher's mission, therefore, becomes not simply managing the current political squabble, but aligning the earthly state with these absolute ideals, the perfect standard of the good. This alignment demands that the highest rational principle must always rule. The state must strive to be an imperfect mirror of justice itself. This shift in focus is crucial because it solidifies the argument for structured authority. If justice is defined by a universal, immutable form, an ideal grasped only through specialized reason, then governance cannot be left to chance or whim. It demands the stewardship of those few who have achieved this elevated state of mind, those capable of intellectual detachment. The true ruler must therefore be one whose soul is most aligned with reason's contemplation of the forms. They must not seek power for its own sake, nor wealth, nor fleeting public applause. Their motivation must derive from a deep, uncompromising commitment to objective truth and necessary order. If we forget this ultimate standard, this eternal form of justice, and instead focus only on who has the most persuasive voice in the agora today, then the state inevitably degrades. It becomes a collection of loud voices shouting varying definitions of good, none of which touch the purity of the original blueprint. The democracy remains trapped in a cycle of self-contradiction, perpetually mistaking volume for virtue and consensus for truth. The lesson is thus profound. Civil life must constantly reference this ultimate ideal. It cannot merely react to its own internal squabbles. When reason elevates itself above emotion, when the guardians refuse to govern by popular desire, and instead point perpetually toward that unreachable, perfect blueprint, then, perhaps, a lasting form of justice can be glimpsed. However imperfectly it is executed in mortal life. We have journeyed through the deepest parts of human nature, examining the dangerous pull of the collective will. We learned that democracy often mistakes mere clamor for genuine insight, confusing passion with profound knowledge. Now we must look outward, to history itself, and confront a difficult truth. This pattern is not unique to our time or place. Every civilization, in its moment of greatest brilliance, stands on the precipice of repeating this very cycle. The fallibility of human governance is not an accident. It is woven into the very fabric of ambition and desire. We see it in epochs past, when mighty empires built magnificent monuments to their freedom and virtue, believing themselves immune to intellectual decay. They believed that once they achieved a certain level of enlightenment or prosperity, their political form was guaranteed safe forever. Yet history whispers a far more somber warning. The siren's song of immediate gratification, the promise of perfect, unrestrained liberty for all, is too strong to resist. It leads the guardians of culture and thought away from rigorous examination and towards comfortable consensus. The weight of governance becomes a burden so heavy that expertise is discarded in favor of simple participation. When people feel they have nothing left to lose, their caution vanishes, and they begin to treat truth not as a precious commodity to be guarded, but as merely another opinion on the ballot. The journey toward decline often begins subtly. It does not arrive with the crash of armies or the roar of revolution. It arrives instead with apathy. It arrives when critical thought is deemed inconvenient, when asking hard questions becomes exhausting, and simply agreeing with the loudest voice seems less difficult than grappling with complexity. The pursuit of truth gives way to the comfort of shared feeling. The human mind, faced with the monumental task of self-governance, that inner alignment between reason, passion, and desire we explored earlier, often seeks an external simplification. It wishes for a quick solution to deep philosophical problems, believing that the answer must reside in the hands of the many rather than the disciplined few. This shift is deeply dangerous. It is the moment when people begin to prize feeling over form, convenience over principle. And what happens when this reverence for popular emotion overwhelms all else? The rulers lose their objective view. They cease to govern by aligning themselves with those eternal forms of justice and beauty we once identified. They start governing merely to manage immediate dissatisfaction. Their policy becomes a perpetual act of appeasement. They begin issuing decrees designed not to guide the city towards ideal stability, but simply to soothe the momentary discomforts of the majority. The state transforms from an objective pursuit of good into a delicate exercise in psychological management. The inevitable consequence is what we might call decay by consensus. There are no dramatic, satisfying collapses, and thus history often fails to learn the full lesson. Instead, power doesn't vanish. It simply becomes diluted and unfocused. Authority dissipates like smoke across a wide plaza, leaving nothing of lasting structure behind. The pattern is frighteningly consistent. First, genuine intellectual authority declines. The philosophers are sidelined, labeled as elitist or out of touch with the common man. Their demand for disciplined self-mastery seems too difficult, their focus on eternal blueprints too detached from today's concerns. Soon after, the educational process changes. Learning becomes focused on rhetorical skill and popular appeal rather than on deep, critical questioning. The goal is no longer to know reality, but to win the argument. The collective memory grows short. The ability of a people to maintain intellectual rigor fades under the constant pressure of competing opinions. They forget that true expertise requires sacrifice, a willingness to live by principles even when those principles cost popular favor or financial gain. This necessary detachment from immediate pleasure is precisely what democracy, in its purest, least reflective form, struggles to sustain. This cycle is not merely a descriptive model. It serves as a profound psychological diagnosis of the state soul. It warns that every golden age contains within itself the seeds of its own undoing. The momentary success and comfort derived from democratic consensus eventually erode the foundational commitment to reason and specialized knowledge. Wisdom, which requires tireless effort and intellectual discipline, is perceived by the masses as merely another opinion among millions. To understand this cycle means understanding that no amount of mere vote count or clever constitution can stabilize a state built upon shifting emotional tides. Stability must be rooted in an objective commitment to foundational truth, the unchanging forms that guide human action towards genuine justice, regardless of popular will. It requires the unwavering vigilance of those who are educated not for political victory, but for intellectual clarity. This perpetual struggle against the current of momentary feeling is the heaviest and most necessary burden carried by any society aspiring to true lasting enlightenment. Having seen the patterns of decline across ages and cultures, we understand that no civilization is immune to the seductive siren call of immediate happiness. The temptation is always to sacrifice rigorous thought for comforting agreement. We have observed how even the most robust structures of society eventually begin their slow slide into decay. This descent is not marked by sudden catastrophe, but rather by a gradual, almost comfortable apathy, a forgetting of intellectual rigor in favor of shared sentiment. The deepest threat is the devaluation of specialized wisdom. When every voice claims equal authority on matters that require deep study and specialized knowledge, the collective mind becomes diluted, losing its focus and strength. The pursuit of generalized freedom quickly morphs into a weakness of will. Every citizen feels entitled to rule, yet when all appetites are given equal weight, nothing can achieve true mastery. Society finds itself paralyzed by its own consensus, unable to commit fully or define a single path forward. We must therefore ask ourselves, what is required to protect the delicate structure of genuine justice? If governance fails because it distributes power too broadly and knowledge too thinly, then the safeguard cannot be simply more voting. It must be specialized guardianship. This realization leads us directly to the concept of the guardianship. The guardians are not merely a class of soldiers or administrators in uniform. Their role is far deeper, calling for a unique blend of intellectual excellence and self-discipline. They represent the pinnacle of human potential applied solely towards the collective good. They must be those who have mastered their inner selves, those who have truly grasped the unchanging forms of justice and goodness. Their primary duty transcends personal ambition or even immediate political popularity. It is an obligation to truth itself, making them selfless stewards of the city's intellectual life. To govern justly, they cannot be motivated by private profit or public praise. Their motivation must come from a profound understanding of what stability truly means for the whole. This guardianship necessitates a rigorous, lifelong education that does not merely impart facts, but molds character and habit. They must learn to prioritize reason above all else, mastering their own appetites and passions so thoroughly that these inner storms never compromise their judgment regarding the state's needs. The training for such guardians is therefore agonizingly demanding. It demands intellectual detachment from temporary desire. They are educated not just in philosophy or strategy, but in self-control, in recognizing when a consensus merely masks ignorance, and when emotional outcry obscures objective reality. They must achieve a profound state of disciplined objectivity. And this brings us to the crucial distinction. The guardian's commitment is always to the form of justice, which is an ideal existing outside messy human law. while democracy champions the will of the immediate moment, the collective I want. The guardian rules by reference to a higher, stable standard. They must be capable of making decisions that are fundamentally unpopular in the short term, but are undeniably necessary for the long-term health and intellectual integrity of the civilization. The power vested in these guardians is therefore not the power of coercion alone. It is the power derived from objective truth and perfected reason. It is a stewardship built upon understanding necessity. They serve as the immune system of the polis, protecting it from the viral spread of unsustainable opinions and fleeting passions that threaten to dismantle its very soul. Without this specialized, philosophically informed guardianship, the inevitable conclusion remains. Any society relying solely on popular will or superficial equality is structurally incapable of achieving sustained justice. It guarantees a perpetual wobble, an exhausting cycle of indecision followed by rash reactionary outbreaks, forever oscillating between order and chaos, never resting in the profound peace provided by disciplined reason guiding enlightened hands. We have traced the fatal trajectory of societies that confuse choice with genuine understanding. From the chaotic agora, where every voice held equal weight, to the elegant decay marked by committee decisions, we have seen the fundamental flaw: humanity's dangerous love for liberty, a freedom often mistaken for wisdom itself. We acknowledged that mere agreement does not equate to true justice. Indeed, it often masks an underlying weakness. If previous chapters showed us the symptoms of decline, the cacophony of unexamined opinion, the paralysis of excessive choice, and the seductive illusion of simple equality, then this final passage must define the necessary cure. The solution Plato reveals is not merely a change in ruling class. It is a profound philosophical reorientation of the state itself. The true stability of a civilization does not rest upon the shifting tides of popular sentiment or the volume of rhetoric raised in a crowded forum. Instead, it relies on an objective truth, a guiding wisdom that stands apart from human passion and fleeting whim. This understanding calls us back to the very source of our inquiry, the unwavering ideal forms. The form of justice, for instance, is not something humanity invents through vote. It is a transcendent pattern, perfect in its blueprint, existing outside the messy imperfections of lived life. To truly govern any state, one must first grasp this eternal model of justice and structure. The political goal, therefore, cannot be merely maximizing happiness or satisfying popular demand. It must be achieving fidelity to this objective ideal. This realization forces a shift from a purely external diagnosis, what the city does, to an internal mandate, what the soul must become. We established that true governance begins with the mastery of the self. The philosopher ruler, therefore, cannot merely possess knowledge. They must embody absolute philosophical discipline. They must master their own desires and emotions before they are fit to guide the millions. The necessity for this highly disciplined authority leads us back to the concept of guardianship. These are not simply men of power. They are dedicated experts whose singular loyalty is owed not to any faction, or even to temporary popular will, but solely to the transcendent good, the enduring form of justice itself. Their mandate requires rigorous self-control and intellectual detachment, virtues that demand profound sacrifice. The challenge facing humanity, therefore, is a fundamental contradiction. We are beings endowed with brilliant intellects capable of understanding abstract truth, yet we constantly revert to the comfort of emotional impulse. We prefer the warmth of familiar passion over the cold clarity of reasoned principle. This preference for immediate feeling over disciplined contemplation proves to be the most persistent and deeply rooted obstacle to civilization's flourishing. The decline Plato warns us against is not a single dramatic event, but rather a gradual slippage. It begins when the ruling class grows lazy in its adherence to objective truth. They begin to compromise their philosophical ideals for the fleeting applause of the many. Slowly, they start treating opinion as if it were knowledge, and passion as if it were virtue. And with each such concession, the state weakens its foundational structure, succumbing not to foreign invasion or rebellion, but to an internal intellectual softness, a quiet surrender to consensus. This is the ultimate cautionary tale of Plato, that the greatest threat to a society is not external force, but voluntary intellectual dereliction. We must recognize that profound philosophical training is not a luxury reserved for scholars. It is a necessary infrastructure for human freedom itself. Without dedicated guardians capable of maintaining this objective perspective, of living, perpetually guided by reason and objective truth, the state loses its bearing. It drifts into the turbulent waters of democratic excess, mistaking mere activity for genuine progress. The conclusion we draw must be one of profound acceptance, that while universal liberty is an ideal to aspire toward, it cannot exist without an anchoring point of supreme philosophical guidance. Order, in this sense, is not repression. It is the disciplined scaffolding built around shared intellectual truth. It is the structured path that allows individual reason, rather than impulsive desire, to determine the common good. The philosopher king, or those dedicated guardians modeled after his ideal, represents this necessary corrective, a living embodiment of objective wisdom. Their burden is precisely that sacrifice, choosing constant self-mastery and adherence to the forms over personal comfort or political popularity. It is a life lived for the sake of intellectual clarity above all else. The final message echoing through history remains potent. Human civilization, in its broadest sense, can only endure if it constantly performs this difficult philosophical labor, the work of looking inward, diagnosing our biases, and rigorously seeking objective truth. Philosophy, therefore, is not merely a subject for contemplation. It is the necessary, sustaining muscle of genuine freedom. To neglect philosophy is to invite decline, proving that even the most articulate democratic fervor cannot build lasting justice without the guidance of reasoned wisdom. We return now to the quiet certainty of this moment, back to the expanse where our contemplation began. The sunset paints the sky in hues that are both beautiful and fleeting, a perfect visual metaphor for the passing nature of human systems. Throughout these chapters, we have followed a rigorous philosophical argument, one based on observation, deep thought, and an unwavering examination of what truly sustains a just life. We saw that stability is not found in the volume of voices or the enthusiasm of the crowd, but rather in the disciplined clarity of mind. The great failure of man's institutions has always been forgetting this fundamental truth, that governing itself is fundamentally different from simply living within it. To live merely by impulse, to follow the currents of popular opinion without pause for reflection, that is intellectual negligence on a societal scale. We have seen how democracies mistake clamor for consensus, equating mere choice with genuine wisdom. This confusion blinds society to its own deepest needs, the need for disciplined structure. The core philosophical weight we must carry forward is this recognition that philosophy is not merely an academic luxury. It is, in fact, a necessary infrastructure, the foundational support beam upon which true human freedom can rest. To neglect it is to accept a form of intellectual debt that only compounding interest, manifested as societal chaos, can repay. Consider the repeating cycle we have witnessed in history's great passages. The rise of a shining moment of apparent liberty, followed by a gradual descent into self-governance via appetite. Every epoch believes itself immune to this pattern, convinced that their unique wisdom or temporary passion will sustain them differently. But the underlying mechanisms remain dangerously consistent. The impulse is always toward maximum freedom, the boundless desire for choice. And what does unchecked liberty naturally reward? It rewards volume over value. It elevates the passionate plea above the reasoned argument. It makes emotional intensity a greater political currency than demonstrable truth. In doing so, it undermines every specialized skill and objective expertise that was hard-won by patient study. The greatest threat to justice, therefore, is not necessarily an external tyrant, but rather the collective willingness of free people to willingly surrender their critical faculties. It is the insidious habit of assuming that because we have the capacity for reason, we always know how or when to apply it to governance. This leads us back to the most profound implication. If a society cannot compel its citizens toward self-examination, if it fails to cultivate the ingrained habit of questioning its deepest assumptions, if it merely operates on inertia and comfortable tradition, then its pursuit of freedom is doomed. It becomes an endless cycle of superficial decision-making that drains collective energy without building anything lasting. The burden, therefore, falls upon those who are most capable, the guardians of wisdom. They must possess a unique intellectual detachment, not because they wish to oppress, but because they have seen the true forms, the perfect ideals of justice, beauty, and goodness, and recognize that popular opinion is merely a blurry approximation of these ideals. Their duty becomes maintaining alignment with the transcendent blueprint, even when doing so means contradicting the cheers and cries emanating from the assembly. The enduring question, then, is this: are we capable of internalizing this philosophy? Can we evolve from viewing reasoned wisdom as something secondary, a nice-to-have hobby for retirement, to recognizing it as the primary, indispensable resource for maintaining civil order and deep human dignity? The challenge remains profoundly personal. Before any state can be justly ordered, every individual soul must first achieve its own internal harmony. We must conquer the chaos within ourselves, the constant tug-of-war between what we desire, what we feel passionate about, and what reasoned truth dictates is actually best. Only when that inner citadel of reason is impregnable can a stable external society possibly be built. The legacy Plato leaves us is not a perfect political manual, but rather an eternal philosophical injunction. Never cease to question the assumptions upon which your life or your city is built. For wisdom is the only technology capable of withstanding time itself, and without it, even the most beautiful sunset or the most vibrant democracy will fade into predictable decline. This necessary vigilance, this commitment to disciplined thought above momentary